Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Dabbling and Design. We are super excited to welcome Jessica Whaley, who I will introduce shortly. I'm Allison Yee, the founder and CEO of the Retail Playground. Up next, Project Pop Up. We're joined by Kristen, our head of community. I see Rachel over there, our COO. But we are all about connecting you with resources and opportunities to do things differently in retail and meet fellow founders and inspiring creatives and people who can just help bring it all to life because it does take a village for each and every one of us to run our businesses. So, Jessica connected with us through another amazing talent, Bethany, who had done some marketing for us, and she's a member of Women's Business League. And as soon as Kristen and I got on a call with her, we were like, yes, you need to come and do a session for the Retail Playground crew because the way that she translates design and brings things from vision board, mood board into reality is just incredible. And as you may notice, we have a shared love of mint, or up next mint as I call it, but maybe you've named yours, Jessica. I don't know if you have a different name for it, but your cabinets are just amazing.
Thank you.
Um, so so Jessica is from Joy House. So Joy House is a soul studio led by Jessica Whaley, and she's been an interior designer for over 12 years and worked across diverse residential and commercial projects. And her studio was established out of a pursuit for creative independence. I think we can all relate to that, and a more meaningful connection to the individuals whose lives are enriched by intentional design. Joy House specializes in turning spatial challenges into design opportunities, creating refined, highly functional spaces for both homeowners and small businesses. And she works locally, virtually, all different ways, and has, I have to say, a really great suite of services to kind of meet people where they are. Because in our world, everyone is sort of evolving their business. They may start with a pop up or markets and then move into a semi permanent space and eventually a permanent storefront, but still be dabbling in design in other ways. So I think there's so much need for really understanding the design process and how it can empower the shopping experience and just all the things. So I'm going to stop talking, turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here. Very excited for this morning.
Woohoo! So thrilled. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to share my presentation.
And please put questions in the chat throughout. Kristen will be in there and we will do Q&A right at the end.
Perfect. And hopefully everybody's seeing my screen. Okay, awesome. Yes, thank you, Allison and Kristen. I'm so thrilled to be here today. It's an exciting opportunity for me, I think, to be in front of so many wonderful creatives, so people who are makers and artisans. You're really creating, wonderful things in the world and entrepreneurs yourself. So happy to be in front of you and have this opportunity to just share a little bit about what I do as a designer. And hopefully you'll find it fun and inspiring. And I did, try to inject the retail playground mint green into my presentation, so keep it on brand. I'm going to, okay, perfect. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. So I've been an interior designer for over 12 years, mostly commercial, and I actually worked at a large architecture firm in Boston for many years, designing all different types of projects and scales. And then, when the pandemic happened, I kind of took this moment to self-reflect and say, okay, I think in my heart of hearts, I would love to kind of go off, do my own thing someday, but when do I take that leap of faith? But I started to kind of build the infrastructure of my own business in the quiet downtime of pandemic 2021. But actually, I was kind of juggling my full-time day job as a designer and doing my side gig. And I did that for about 4 years, which in my opinion was a little too long. And then this past May, so it's really just been 4 months, I said, you know what? I don't want to do this limbo, two things at once. I'm gonna just go for it. So I've really only been full-time entrepreneur for 4 months, but been a designer for over 12 years. And, it's a passion of mine, but I'm grateful, I went to school for it, and I'm so grateful that 12 years in, it's really something that I still enjoy. Um, but yes, so like Kristen and Allison said, my company is Joy House Design Studio. I think the name evokes a little bit of playfulness, right? I want to design spaces that evoke joy for people, whether it's homeowners, whether it's small business owners. And we spend 90%, I think, of our lives indoors, right? So it's like, let's be thoughtful about the environments that we create. How can they serve us for functionality, and how can they inspire us? So really that's what I do. And I do a lot of residential renovations for homeowners, kitchens, baths, basement, all those types of projects. But I also do small commercial. And I think deep down, that is really where my passion lies. It's just something where designing a space that many people will kind of come through and have either an emotional experience. That's really what excites me. And it's also kind of helping small business owners like yourself, kind of create that vision and execution. So that's kind of a little bit about me. And then I live in Ipswich, Mass, so up on the North Shore. But I do virtual services as well if you're not located, in the greater Boston area. And I live with my husband and 2-year-old daughter. So I am gonna run through. And we will have a Q&A at the end, but feel free to put questions in the chat. But just a quick overview of, what I'm going to go through today. So I'll talk about what role a designer plays. You might have preconceived ideas of what an interior designer does, so I'll kind of run through, that process. And then specifically, I'll talk about my design process and how I work with clients such as yourselves. And then I have 10 design tips when planning a brick and mortar store launch. So I know many of you, maybe you're doing, pop-ups at fairs or, temporary storefronts. And then maybe you're translating someday to a retail storefront. And then that'll be a takeaway too, that it's kind of like a tearaway sheet that you'll have that will kind of help inform, the early planning stages of a store. And then I'll end with an example of a local bookshop that I've been designing all summer. I was really hoping to have final photography today. Unfortunately, as all things in construction, it's never fully predictable. And, when we booked this presentation several months ago, I was like, for sure it's going to be done mid-September. Unfortunately, it's not fully complete, but I'll have some fun process photos to share with you. So. All right, so we'll get into the role of an interior designer. So essentially what I do, especially for people like yourselves, I help kind of create that initial concept, right, for what that built environment 3D space of your business is going to look like. And then within that, right, it's creating a special vibe that aligns with your specific brand and your target customer. So, we've all been in stores that, maybe you've gone into a retail store and you're like really like, wow, I want to hang around here. I want to be encouraged to purchase. It's a great atmosphere. What is it about that space that's kind of making you want to hang around? And I think, in this day and age, the vibe, I think Google added like a vibe page to their online reviews recently. And I don't know about you, but like when I look for a restaurant to go out to, I kind of check that, right? It's kind of like you want to understand, we're all looking for an experience, and is like, okay, is that going to be if you're going on a date night? Like, what's the lighting? There's so many things that kind of go into what that vibe is. So, specifically, we're talking about your retail store, right? Like, how can your brand's lifestyle and, what you want to say to your customers, how can that come through in a tangible way when you're building out a space? Um, and then a really big part of what I do is I do a lot of spatial floor planning. So, I do everything from, say you have a vacant space and you actually need to lay out brand new walls. I do a lot of that and making sure, square footages are accurate, things are met to building code, you have proper clearances. So that's like a big part of what I do. And a lot of what people hire me for is kind of helping, create an efficient and functional floor plan. And then also, with that in mind, how can we optimize sales? How are we placing things in the floor plan that optimize sales for you as a business owner? And then also a big part of what I do is making sure that the environment we're designing is encouraging people to want to hang around, right? Because the longer they spend in your store, hopefully, the more they're gonna spend. Um, so, those are all large pieces of what I do. A big part too of interior design is coming up with a thoughtful lighting plan, right? So we live in the Northeast, in the winter after daylight savings, right? It's dark at 4 p.m. If your shop is open to 6 p.m., maybe it's open to 8 p.m., you really need to have good interior lighting so that the merchandise you're selling is visible, right? And not only is it able to be clearly seen by your customers, but it also wants to be intentional so that the mood is appropriate, right? I think we've all been in spaces where the color of lighting is very blue and harsh and it feels very sterile. And you're like, why am I so unsettled in here? Like, why do I want to get the heck out of here? It's probably because the color temperature is not very well planned, right? So you kind of want to think about all those components to make sure that, things are visible. People can, there's not a dark corner that people are like, I'm not going to go over there because I really can't see anything. Um, in addition to lighting, I help source all physical materials for the actual store. So whether it's flooring, tile, backsplashes, um, paints, wallpapers, so many materials, right, that kind of bring about a tangible space. And then as a commercial designer, I kind of keep in mind the durability of that product, right? You're going to have high traffic, so you can't really be specifying something that's going to the same thing that you would maybe in your home renovation, right? You want to be specifying products that are going to be durable enough and hold up to a commercial, um, you know, traffics. In addition, sustainability. So we all live in a day and age, right, where we're more aware of sustainability, what's ending up in the landfill, what's off-gassing harmful chemicals that we're breathing in for the indoor air quality. And that's one thing that, like my background as a commercial designer, it's really informed, what products are we specifying inside? And we're getting to know, we're learning so much more in terms of research of like what is harmful. And, they say there's so many things that off gas, even furniture from, cheap websites. There's so many things that we don't even realize are kind of harming the indoor air quality. So, when I work with a client, I understand their budget, but kind of how can we make sustainable choices that, might be able to be reused? Maybe you're purchasing secondhand, keeping all those things in mind. And of course, budget, right? That's such a big part of, obviously, that's the biggest constraint of any renovation. But, kind of understanding that up front helps inform, what can we spend more on and then what can we hope to save. Um, and then, I also help design custom millwork and cabinetry, which you'll see a little bit of that in my bookshop project. Also artwork and murals. That's another exciting opportunity I had with my bookstore design. I was able to engage local artists. I had these like ideas for murals in the store, and we were able to find two artists, and they did a lovely job. And you'll see some photos in the coming slides. And then, of course, an interior designer, right? We source furnishings, artwork, decor. So, specific area rugs that are going to hold up in a commercial setting, something that maybe it's a carpet tile that it's assembled to look like an area rug so that if there's a really bad stain, you can swap one out instead of the whole area rug being ruined. And then lastly, a big part of my job is being on site and coordinating with the contractor. Maybe there's an architect if it's a job that's involving a big expansion and exterior facade work. And then tradesmen, right? Electricians, plumbers. There's so many people kind of involved in a construction project. And, I love to be kind of your voice and make sure that the design intent is kind of held through and executed correctly, right? It's like if you're going to spend money to hire a designer, you want to make sure that that designer is going to be your voice throughout the project. Sometimes I call myself, the bad messenger, but I protect you. So okay, so my specific design process. So initially, I always start with the free consultation. So it's usually a phone call, maybe it's a Zoom meeting, but that's always this initial conversation where I kind of hear from you. What's your project scope? What are the goals you have? Do you have a specific vision already? Maybe you don't, and that's something I can help you with. Do you have a budget in mind for your renovation, right? I mean, how much are we going to spend? And let's be realistic about what you should invest, and it's going to kind of get the most return on investment. And then of course the timeline, right? Like when are you looking to open your store? When does maybe the landlord turn over the space to you so you can start your construction work? All these things are included in that first initial meeting, and it's free. And then from there, I kind of take everything you said, and I come up with a proposal. So the way typically I also like to do my proposals is I kind of run through a whole list of my services. So, and I like to break them up and kind of give my clients almost like an a la carte design offering. So it's great when a client hires me, right, from initial, conceptual visioning to like formalized construction, but that's not always in the budget, right? Maybe a client doesn't need me to create 3D renderings that are pretty, right? Maybe they really need my help for coming up with a floor plan and sourcing materials. So I kind of give you all these options with an associated design fee, and you can kind of pick and choose. And so that's where the proposal, contract signing kind of come in. And then once we've agreed to work with each other, we schedule that initial site meeting. So I come to your space, I take all existing dimensions. In this day and age, sometimes there's existing floor plans, available maybe from the landlord or online, a listing for commercial real estate. But if there's not, I really just come and kind of draw up my own set of plans based on site survey. I take existing photos, and then we go through a client questionnaire, which is pretty extensive, and it's always based on, you as the client. I kind of have my general questions that I go through, but then it's also very geared towards you as the business owner, and really like everything from the user experience to, if you had maybe a pop-up, what were issues you were having and things you want to solve for. So we get pretty in depth because that all helps inform the design. Then we kind of go into a conceptual design phase. So you'll see examples of this too, but conceptual design, it's kind of coming up with that vision for your space, right? So we kind of, maybe you have a Pinterest board that's already, starting your Kickstarter ideas. We kind of take that and start to refine it and make it a little bit more unique and geared specifically towards your business. And then number 5, we hop to spatial planning, right? So I've done that existing dimension site survey, and I start to kind of play around with the floor plan layout. Are we, adding a bathroom? Are we adding an event space? Do we have to, add doors for code? We look at a bunch of different floor plans. Then we dive into design development. So that's kind of getting a little bit more specific, right? So, okay, what's your floor going to be made out of if you don't have beautiful hardwood to use as an existing material? And then would you like to see 3D renderings? 3D renderings are always helpful if you struggle with visualization, right? It can kind of give you that confidence to say, okay, I feel good in what the space is going to be built out as. So if you're somebody who maybe struggles with seeing the end result, that's a great, bonus to kind of have. But not all people, maybe a lot of you are kind of visual people, and given that you're makers and creators, so maybe you don't need that. And then I kind of dive into the actual interior construction drawings. So, ceiling plans, power plans, where are you locating your outlets, right? The outlets have to be intentional. Do you need power at your checkout desk? Um, you know, do you have decorative pendants and you want to make sure that they're, aligned and centered in the space? All these things I can help with. Then I go into purchasing. So purchasing of the actual furniture, artwork, decor, all of that. Sometimes I just do the sourcing and the client does the purchasing and I kind of create like a basically a shopping list, if you will. Or sometimes I fully take on doing all the ordering and the purchasing. So it kind of depends again on the client. And then we go into on-site construction check-ins. So with this bookstore, I have been on site a lot. And luckily, it's only a mile from my home, so it's very convenient. But the electrician will call me and say, "Hey, I'm here today to install the lighting. Can you come down and help me?" And I'm like, "Yes, I would rather be there on site if I have time and tell you, if you're, confused at all by the plans, like let's talk it through so that it's executed correctly the first time, right? That's so important. It's like, let's not go back and have to redo work when it's a construction project. And then, of course, move-in celebrations. So I'm really hoping that the move-in for my bookstore client is going to happen within the next few weeks. But I also have been saying that for weeks. So, I encourage you to, at the end of this, you can, follow me on Instagram and we'll have some great final photography once that's all finished. But obviously, that's like a ribbon cutting. Hey, you're open in the town that you're doing business in, let's pop champagne and have a good time and celebrate because a construction project is no joke. Okay, so 10 design tips when specifically planning a retail store launch. So these are kind of takeaways, a lot too informed by, the bookshop I have recently worked on, but I think all of these are kind of helpful little snippets that you can kind of take with you, down the road, maybe when you open your own brick and mortar storefront. So obviously, first and foremost, helping you, identify the essence of your brand and how you want your shop to feel. So we kind of talked about that. I'm sure by now too, you probably have a good sense of what your brand is. Maybe, you have a logo, you have colors that kind of shape who you are. And also how do you want your shop to feel, right? There's so much about interior design that's about an emotional response, I think, that people might not think about all the time. So it's really like, how do you want your shop to feel? I was in a store last weekend in Rockport and I walked in and there was like nobody else was in the store. And it was kind of like a gift shop type of store. But one thing I noticed there was, because there were no other people in there, there was also no music. And it just felt super sterile. And I was like, why do I feel like I shouldn't be here? And then I was like, there's no music. There's no, obviously it helps when there's also other people and, conversation, but it was almost like I just felt like I was being like watched, or it was just so sterile. And I was like, ooh, and that's another thing, music, like light ambient noise. So really think about how you want your shop to feel and think about your specific user experience, right? So in the case of the bookstore, our user experience, I mean, the demographic of people coming into this bookshop, it's really everybody. It's everybody from little kids with their parents going to the children's section to, teenagers picking out the latest rom-com book, adults kind of looking for the latest fiction, nonfiction, and older people looking for their, favorite picks. So it's really, you kind of need to understand like who is your target audience, and you need to kind of make sure that that's all a part of your design process. Number three, plan with flexibility and growth in mind. So this is something that you want to think about things that you might need to change out in your store, right? You never want to limit yourself so much in the built construction of your space that you don't have flexibility to move things around or, come up with a brilliant idea in 2 years. And, oh, I really have this like major, second renovation I have to do because of it. So kind of like think about your business and how it might grow in 5, even 10 years. I mean, a lot of commercial leases can be 5 to 10 years. They can be less if it's a more temporary lease, but, kind of plan out like, okay, how long am I committing to this space and what are things that might need to change? Number four, create visual hierarchy within your space. So really a good design, I think, is all about, having moments that kind of draw your attention, but it's not hitting you over the head. So specifically in this bookstore project, we kind of decided, okay, where are our big moments going to be? We're going to have like a great moment above the reception desk, and it's going to have the name of the store. And then the back wall in the bookshop is going to be the kids zone. So let's come up with like a big mural that kind of draws people to the back of the store and it's playful so you kind of want to create these moments that focus attention within the space, but aren't, hitting your customers over the head with, oh my God, there's too much stimulation, right? You want to be thoughtful about that. Number five, incorporate thoughtful accessibility access. So this is really important in terms of creating a commercial store. So accessibility, I mean people who may be bound to a wheelchair, people who might be handicapped. You want to kind of make sure that those people are included in your design and they have proper clearances to, move their wheelchair around. They have proper turning radiuses around, your merchandising. And one thing specifically too, like at a checkout counter, for commercial code for accessibility, you really need to have a counter at 34 inches of height, so that somebody in a wheelchair, that's at their level that they can have the transaction with you. So you want to be, especially in a commercial retail shop, you want to be as accommodating as possible and you want people to visit you and even think about, is there a ramp outside or does somebody have to step up? All these things, are kind of either you're being more inclusive to people to access your store or you're restricting people. And then, of course, number six, be intentional about lighting. We kind of talked about the importance of lighting already. Number seven, incorporate appropriate wayfinding and signage. So this is important too. Think about, what are you selling? Do you have a big store? Are there areas in your store where maybe you don't have visibility from the checkout? How can you be as clear as possible to your customers so that they don't really have to come and ask you a million questions of where is XYZ, right? Like how can you plan the store so that it's intuitive for them, and they don't have to, be confused about where a certain area is. And specifically related to the bookstore, right? Like we are having, placards designed to say, hey, this is fiction, latest releases, staff picks, young adult, kids zone. You got to be, where is that signage and is it clear? Is it big enough? Is the scale right? All those things. Number eight, plan the shop layout with sight lines in mind. So when I say sight lines, I'm talking about almost like security sight lines. So in designing the shop, we placed the checkout desk for her transactions to be in a spot where when she was standing there, she has like sight lines and visibility to all the patrons in the store, with the exception of the event space in the back, which will have less merchandising. But I specifically designed the shop so that there's no high bookshelves in her way of seeing people. So some people may invest in a security system, but if you're not and you kind of want to rely on your eye, just keep that in mind, right? Maybe you don't want to have giant vertical towers blocking your view. Number nine, ensure proper heights of merchandise displays. So again, thinking about your user experience. One thing specifically for the bookstore, and I'll kind of give you a quick little background, but she had a temporary pop-up store that was only a few months. And when she had that store, she had bookshelves where she was selling books on the bottom shelf. So literally, right at the ground to about 10 or 12 inches. And she realized that kind of in that 4-month window of doing her pop-up, she was like, those books weren't really being engaged with. And so in the new store, we designed like a custom 12-inch base for all of her bookshelves so that all the merchandise kind of starts at like, 12 to 24 inches. So it's not super high, but it's a little bit more comfortable. So just think about that, right? Like, are you placing things that are going to be a little burdensome for your customers to engage with? Because you want to ultimately sell, right? You want to sell your products. So how can you be thoughtful about where um, your merchandise is located? And then lastly, think about your exterior window display. Oh, that is like the engagement to the world. It's your first impression, right? It is how you say, please come in, like take a peek at what we have. And then maybe you guys are familiar with the brand Anthropology, right? So, I mean, they do insanely cool, creative window displays. There's specific jobs. I don't know if it's like um, visual display managers. But I remember in college, I was like, man, that would be such a cool internship. Like, I just think it's so cool to just come up with basically an art display, right? That's engaging the passerby. And it's really like this, window out to people saying, please come in. So think about that and how can you change it out? How can you engage passerbys? Okay, finally, hopping to the bookshop and my case study. So, I've kind of shared with you my design process, and then this is kind of a real project I've been working on all summer. Hopefully, it's opening soon, so stay tuned for final photography. But I can't say enough good things about this client. She is wonderful. So, her bookshop is Title Pages Bookshop here in Ipswich, Mass. So a funny little backstory, she had a pop-up. She did a temporary pop-up store from last end of fall to early spring. So I think it was like 4 or 5 months. And it was in a very small footprint, probably 500 square feet, if I had to guess, about a third of what she's moving to. And so my husband, daughter, and I went in, around Christmas. We bought some books, and I was just like, oh, this is so great to have a local independent bookshop in my town. And then, like a few weeks later, I'm reading in our local newspaper, and it was an article about her and, how she finally opened this bookstore. But it was a temporary location, and she's looking for a permanent home. And so I saw that as an opportunity, and I was like, oh my God, this would be great. I got to reach out. And also just like to so many wonderful things about like helping design a bookstore in my hometown now and get involved in the community, work with another woman-owned business, like it's like I'm helping her launch her dream. So many good things that kind of came about. So I approached her, I emailed her. She's so sweet, and she was like, heck yeah, let's do this. So, I kind of sent her my list of design services. And she did a few pick and choose options. So she hired me for like floor plans, material sourcing, furniture sourcing. We didn't do 3D renderings. And then scope creeped a bit. And so then I got hired for more. So you'll kind of see, images, and I'll kind of walk you through my design process. But her store is just over 1,000 square feet. It's been an interesting project in that I think the reason why it's been so delayed is the landlord, and maybe this is a similar situation that some of you might experience, but if you're kind of opening a store, right, there's usually the landlord of the building that you're leasing. And so they were responsible for kind of bringing her space up to a white box level of finish, right, where then she can kind of go in and do the customization. One thing that was great about the timeline of me being hired is that we kind of got a lot of the initial planning done while like some of the construction hadn't even started. So that's just one tip. If you can kind of like get your ducks in a row, maybe ahead of you even getting the lease. One thing we've been able to capitalize on is, using the landlord's subs, so say the electricians, right? Like I did a lighting plan, and we had already purchased some of the big like decorative lights, and we already had them on site so that when he was doing his, white box install for lights, we were able to use that same electrician to install the lights we got. So we saved a bit of money instead of her having to go out and hire her own electrician. So just kind of think about that. If you can kind of move things along and kind of have your design ready to go, you might be able to capitalize and save a bit of money, right, on having some of those early subcontractors install. I'm keeping an eye on time. I'm going to get a little speedier. But existing conditions. So this is some of the photos of the space when I showed up on day one. Kind of grim, kind of sad. This was also a little bit like into demolition. So it was an art gallery before, but I was like, wow, we could film a horror movie here. So existing conditions. So then moving to inspirational imagery. So this is kind of part of my conceptual design planning. So on the right here, this was the exterior window display of her pop-up. So just to kind of give you a flavor of like what she had already established in terms of a design vision, it's like her logo is like the blues, the golds, the yellows, seaside town, we're by the water. So kind of that's kind of the branding that was already established. And then these were some images that I kind of pulled based on her client questionnaire. So, how can we make the reception desk be, full of merchandise? It's an opportunity to not just be a checkout desk, but, how can we maximize selling? So you'll see in the later slides that there are beautiful millwork desks that's been built and constructed. Outward facing shelves and kind of coming up with an idea of something like maybe it's staff picks by the front door that's ever changing, but the category is always the same. And then an idea for a mural with the kids area. So you'll kind of see how that translates. And then vision and vibe. So this is kind of where I come in and help. You might have an idea of, hey, like this is my logo today. These are my colors, but like, how do we actually translate this into a built environment? So these are kind of images. Again, this book display was from her pop-up, and so was this image. So this was like her children's area in her pop-up shop. And then, the idea is kind of we're by the sea. We want it to be, a little bit coastal inspired, but not like overly hit you over the head, like, hey, we're at the beach, right? Like, how can it be a little abstracted, softer? How can we incorporate, coastal tones while having a little bit of whimsy and playfulness? So I'm gonna try to go a little bit quicker, but the conceptual plan. So, there were no existing floor plans, so I did an existing site survey of the store. So here is our street that we're on, and then this is the main entry, and this is the existing glass storefront, which funky geometry, got to work with it. And then these dash lines are existing ceiling soffit lines, so it's like the ceiling here is higher, the ceiling here is higher. But based on, the different areas and sections that she needs, I kind of diagrammed out, okay, this is kind of what we're working with and based on the flow. And then we do have a single use restroom. And then she has this space at the back that she wants to use as an event space. So you'll see how that translates. So then, that was conceptual. This is kind of diving in a little bit more detail, actually looking at furniture, how furniture fits into the space. Still a little bit of a diagram, but and one thing to keep in mind, so because she had a pop-up store, she had a lot of existing furniture that we wanted to reuse, right? So it's like getting those measurements, laying it out in plan, and kind of understanding, where things are going. And then I'm just going to jump so this is kind of the final floor plan. But essentially, you enter and all these light gray squares that you're seeing are area rugs. So kind of like anchoring these different spaces. All of the yellow shaded blocks are 5 foot tall bookshelves. So that's kind of where you have this like the built-in bookshelves that are kind of wall to wall, give this built-in look. And then she had an existing like farmhouse table and benches that she'll use. So pretty much everything you notice like in the center here is all low. So sight lines are low, it's all low furniture, and then everything, on the walls is going to be that like floor to ceiling bookshelf. And then we have positioned her reception, no, I keep calling it reception desk, checkout desk, right here. So she kind of has the visibility to people entering the store. And then her event space. So this is something where she might, and also just to keep in mind too, as makers, right? How can you create a multi-use of a space in your store, and how can you generate additional revenue, right? So this event space, maybe she's going to host author signings, maybe she's going to have birthday parties, maybe it's a craft night, So there's so many ways to kind of think about a space, and this was also a function that she didn't have in her pop-up. So how can you be creative and flexible and also think in terms of your business model, how can I generate more money, right? And create other events. Um, and then she actually is going to have pop-up vendors in her shop. So she's starting with, I think it's like a luxury snack company. So her pop-up area is going to be kind of at the front of the store. So I think every few months she might change out. But that is something to keep in mind if Ipswich is near any of you and you're interested. I'd be happy to connect you. But I know she kind of wants to bring in small business owners who are maybe like testing out their products. Lighting plan, ceiling plan. So again, this was something that I took a stab at once I did a site survey. We knew that we wanted, kind of specialty light fixtures and these special moments in the space. And this was great because I got this done. We ordered these pendants like wicked quick. And then I did kind of a preliminary pass of where recessed lighting should go based on the floor plan. And I showed up on site and the electrician literally followed my plan. Like he didn't make barely any changes. And I was like, this is fabulous. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the electrical contractor to make sure they're meeting code, right? And all of that. And this was more of like a design plan. But once he said, hey, yeah, it all meets like lighting output, light levels, I was like, perfect. So this was great. And again, it was something that we got a little bit ahead of the curve for install. And then this is a quick, snapshot of all the furniture I selected for the project. So these are some of the wallpapers we selected. We have specialty wallpaper kind of going up where we have like a 3-foot soffit, and it's kind of like enveloping the entry and then the children's zone. So the idea here was to kind of bring about the colors through wallpaper, through, paint accents, murals. And then all of the furnishings are pretty muted, right? A lot of the furnishings, with the exception of the event space chairs, are pretty muted, giving that coastal wood feeling, because you want to have that hierarchy, right? You want to understand where are the big moments, and you're not hitting people over the head with color. It has to be done in a thoughtful way. Um, Okay, and then checkout desk. Oh, I'm so glad I have a final photo to share because it's one of the few that we do have. But this was kind of, you saw the inspiration in the beginning, right? We saw something, precedent image. This was my floor plan, making sure we had appropriate clearances. You can see in my 3D sketch, this is the 34-inch height portion for someone in a wheelchair. So this could probably the majority of where the transactions will happen. And then the rest of it is at 42 inches. And it's also, there's a bunch of storage on the inside. So, it's like a place, she needed a place too to store like new shipments of books that she gets and kind of organizing that inventory. So on the inside, there's a bunch of storage as well. But this was great. We worked with a wonderful carpenter who I gave him this. You can see that they made a slight change in terms of the corner, right? And when he was fabricating it, we kind of revisited, okay, maybe, is this more practical? We get a little bit more linear footage out of it. So we went with that. A mural moment, so fun. So on the left is the scary photo of what was there day one. This was my middle sketch in Procreate. So, I have visionings but if you ask me to actually draw something beautiful, that's not my forte. So this is my sketch. And originally we were going to have open a book and float away. Then we kind of pulled back because we thought that's too much happening on the mural. So on the right, you can see this is our wonderful artist, but she painted this great sun. So this is actually where the project stands on the right today. So it's still an active construction site, but we're working towards the final. And then again, interior signage. So again, creepy day one. There was an air conditioner on the wall, lighting falling out of the ceiling. This is my quick, okay, reception or checkout desk going here. We have some type of signage. We did have the electrical outlet left over from the AC. And then in the final, we said, electrician, just if it's active wires, we don't need it, put a plate on it. And it's still there, but you can't really see it. So that was a good win. But then we had an artist do custom signage behind the checkout desk. And last but not least, this is the event space conditions today. So we had this talented artist do a custom mural. Ipswich is known for Cranes Beach, right? This iconic view of the boardwalk and the sand dunes and the ocean. So she kind of took, an abstracted version with the palette we were using, and it's actually in this photo, it's right here. So this was filled in. It was an old window, they filled it in. So there's a mural here. And then these are these beautiful pendants from West Elm that reminded me of like, like the crimped pages of a book. And these are our tables. So still in flux. We need a lot more to kind of finish the space, but that's kind of where the space stands today. So that is the last slide of everything. And then this is just my final parting slide, like where to reach me. And, I'd love to be connected on Instagram. Feel free to reach out on my website or my email. And then, of course, I offer, should you want to engage my services or even just have an initial free consult call, I would definitely offer you guys a 10% discount off all my design services. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. The visuals are just incredible. Cannot wait to see the finished project. We'll definitely follow along. I learned a ton. And we do have 10 minutes for questions, and there's quite a few in the chat that I think Kristen's going to share with you now.
Yes.
If anyone has questions, you can also raise your hand or chime in at any point.
Yeah. So we'll start with Smita's question, and she asked, what's your rule of thumb for ensuring customer flow that feels natural and not crowded, especially in smaller spaces? I did struggle with this in my second pop-up in Lowell, such a beautiful space.
Oh, that's a good question. I think first kind of understand like what is the scale of your store, right? Like, do you have either multiple rooms? Do you have a single room? And if you have a smaller footprint, right, it's like you do want to you want to maximize and fit as much product. But I would kind of say to break it up into like vignettes and smaller areas that feel balanced, right? So it's like, obviously walls and the exterior of our shop, that is where we can maximize height. It's where we can maximize maybe doing something more custom, whether it is like a mural or kind of drawing attention. But I would say, right, you don't wanna overstimulate your customers, but try to break it up into things that are a little bit more bite size in terms of vignettes. What's the first impression too in your store? Like, do you want that big moment that people are drawn to? And then it's like, oh, they see that, and then they kind of trickle and find the smaller products within your store. But definitely try to break it up into something more less overwhelming. But think about, yeah, think about the square footage and think about, the architectural space. How can you maximize, whether it's through shelving? Yeah, think about like where are those moments where you can kind of maximize merchandise without overwhelming.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful for future pop-ups in markets.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah. That was a tough location because two sides of the entire space were all windows. So you
Mm,
lose some of that maximizing height space on the walls, and
right.
like that massive amount of beautiful, amazing light, but massive amount of windows.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so we have another question from Alex, and she asks, being a clothing brand, I sometimes struggle with coming off the wall space and being in the middle of the space with racks. I've done tables in the past, but I was wondering if you have advice or examples about using the middle of the space better.
Ooh, that's very true, right? It's like with clothing, oftentimes you want it maybe on a hanger or something so that it's easily, you can run through things. But I would say too, like tiered display. I've seen some great like millwork pieces that, maybe it's like the top of it is a 42 inch, 3 foot 6 foot display counter. And then below it, maybe you have, you know, if it goes from 42, maybe you jump to 30, and it's like a 12-inch different increments, but almost like a tiered display. Obviously the clothing would have to be folded, right? It's not on a rack necessarily. But I think about like your sight lines, right? And what is, eye level for a lot of people. Maybe it's 48 to 60 inches, like thinking about children and older adults. So yeah, I would encourage you to kind of think about your sight lines when you enter your space, and how can you be creative in terms of displaying product, but especially for clothing. Or do you have something that's maybe not a rack, but it's kind of this built frame, with lower clothes racks, something that might be, maybe you have tiered displays that are higher up, 42, 36, and then you have like a lower area for like almost a coat rack, closet type of display. Um, but yeah, I think too, I know with clothing, if they're folded, it sometimes requires more upkeep for you as the shop owner if people don't put things back together nicely. Um, but think about how you can display at varying heights while keeping things, still within reach of people, and not too tall. I would say don't go higher than, 42, because 4 feet maybe gets too high for some people. That's a good question as well.
Alex, did you have anything else to add to that question?
I
No?
just added another
Yep.
question in here, but I can just say it. I guess sometimes I struggle with like having things like lower to the ground too, like on the floor or like just off the floor.
Mhm.
Um, like I always think, oh, I have to have it on a table or something. Um, so I wonder if there's any like even like within shelving, I feel like, oh, I shouldn't have anything on the lowest shelf because no one's gonna shop that. But that's not
Mhm.
always the case, of course. Like I've shopped low shelves and stuff at stores, but I always think, oh, no one's gonna buy this stuff on the lowest shelf or whatever. So I don't know if you have any ideas or advice on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I do think, for the bookstore, like, it was one thing she noticed, right? She was like, yeah, the bottom shelf of these bookshelves, people really are engaging with. And so actually, too, the bookshelves that we used, a lot of them were from her pop-up, and they were simple Wayfair shelves with height adjustable, intermediate shelves. And so that's when we had a custom mill worker for her new store design this like 12-inch plinth base. And then everything, and then the bookshelf itself was about 5 feet. So it would be like 1 foot above the ground to 6 feet was kind of her shelving dimensions. Um, it's, I understand it's kind of like a missed opportunity if you're trying to really maximize, merchandise and you're like, oh, but I really need that shelf at the bottom. It just make that decision in terms of, it's probably if you have a smaller footprint and less square footage, maybe it is worth, adding that merchandise there. Um, but yeah, or maybe it's intentionally place more eye-catching product on the bottom shelf. Maybe it's more vibrant, colorful stuff, right? That kind of like innately, catches people's eyes more, than something that's a beige cardigan, right? Maybe you put the beige cardigan at the 42-inch height versus in the, more colorful product is at the bottom. So you're kind of trying to motivate people to, hey, pick me up. I'm really cool.
So we had a couple of questions that pretty much kind of covered the same thing about if you are working with a tight budget, how do you maximize it? And like my question was, where do you splurge? Where do you save?
Yes, that's a great question. I would say, splurge on the things that you think are going to make the biggest impact, right? So that might be, think about those moments of hierarchy in your space. Where are the big moments? Where are those things that people are going to take a picture and upload to Instagram and say, hey, I'm at so and so shop. And then maybe that doesn't have to be a ton of money, but in our case, right, it's like hiring a muralist to create those iconic, hey, this is the sun wall for the kids zone, or we have, great signage over the checkout desk. So kind of think about those moments and be willing to invest in the design, the execution of it. And also lighting. I can't stress lighting enough. I think lighting, it needs to be thoughtful. And if you feel overwhelmed, like maybe, look up inspirational images for other, or maybe some prototypes of lighting layouts for stores. Just because if your products aren't well lit, right, it's going to be a big disservice to you. So I would focus on investing in lighting, those big moments, and also think about, things maybe you don't want to replace that need to be the workhorse in your store. So for example, the checkout desk in the bookshop, right? It's like we really wanted that to be like an anchor in the space. We wanted it to be clear. There's nothing worse that when you're in a retail store and you're like, where is the checkout counter? I cannot find the checkout counter, right? It's like you want to be clear and communicating to your audience, hey, this is where you buy your books. This is where, so think about those items and, I would put money there and then maybe save on furniture or, if you have maybe find secondhand lounge chairs or go on Facebook Marketplace. We did reuse a good amount of furniture for the bookshop, and some of it was, less expensive items from online retailers, and some of it we painted to kind of bring like the cohesive design that we were looking for, versus just having it be plain white, right? So like, what can you kind of paint or fix up that your customer's not going to realize, and then really invest in the big moments, the places that also people are going to interact with a lot, right? If you have like a lot of kids kind of coming up to the checkout counter and it's made of particle board, over time, it's not gonna hold up, and rather spend more money up front.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This is all the time we have, but I know you'll be in the playground a little bit, and
Yes.
I think anyone is welcome to reach out. We will share this presentation and the recording and your tear sheet. And for those who couldn't join us as well, that will all be available. But we can't thank you enough. This was absolutely wonderful. And thanks
Oh,
everyone
thank
for
you so
joining.
much. No, this has been wonderful, and I'm so happy to meet everybody in your group. And yeah, definitely feel free to, reach out or connect with me. And I'll be on the retail playground a bit, in the coming weeks.